the real birthplace of the Black Death, found through ancient DNA. For 600 years, Europe asked the same haunting question. Where did it come from? Millions dead, entire bloodlines erased, families burying their own children in mass graves because there was simply no time for individual tombs. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it shattered civilizations. It rewrote the course of human history. Economies collapsed, wars stopped mid-battle, entire villages were simply abandoned. And for all those centuries, we didn't know where the monster was born. Historians had theories, scientists had guesses, but nobody knew. Not really, until now. The answer wasn't hiding in the plague pits of London. It wasn't waiting in the records of Italy or the archives of Constantinople. It was sleeping in a stone grave, half buried in a mountain cemetery, in a place almost nobody was looking, in a region so remote, so forgotten, that the clue to history's greatest mystery was buried alongside the very people who first fell to the plague. Welcome back to History Diary, where ancient DNA reveals the stories history forgot to tell. Let's set the scene. Picture Central Asia in 1338. The Tian Shan Mountains tower above a shimmering lake called Issyk Kul. On its shores, a small community of Nestorian Christians, traders connected to the Silk Road, are going about their lives. They're buying, selling, trading goods from across the known world. Indian ocean pearls, Iranian coins, Mediterranean artifacts, spices from the Far East. They are connected to everyone, and they don't even realize they're standing at the center of a storm that's about to engulf the world. Something changes that year. People start dying, a lot of people. In just one community, over 100 souls. A small mortality crisis in a small trading community. Nothing special, nothing worth remembering. At least, not at the time. Except someone did remember. They etched words into stone. This is the tomb of the believer Sanmak. He died of pestilence. The word pestilence, medieval code for death by plague. A vague term, yes, but deeply ominous. A catch-all diagnosis for any horrific disease that could wipe out an entire community. Fast forward to 1886. Russian archaeologists are excavating 2 cemeteries near Lake Issyk Kul. They find those graves, dozens of them. Over 118 people buried between 1338 and 1339, all marked with the same word, pestilence. The archaeologists take note. They document their findings meticulously. They bring the skeletal remains back to Russia for storage. And then, what they found simply disappears into the archives. Then what happens? The discovery goes into a museum archive in St. Petersburg, and it sits there for over a century, locked away, forgotten, waiting for someone to finally understand its significance. This is where the real story begins. 2019, a medieval historian named Philip Slavin is working at the University of Stirling in Scotland. He's deep in research about the economics of the Black Death, studying how trade patterns and climate affected the pandemic's spread, when he stumbles upon something in old field notes from that 1886 excavation. An anomaly, a pattern, something that shouldn't be there. 118 deaths in 2 years, from a tiny community, all marked with one word, pestilence. But here's what strikes him as remarkable. These deaths occurred nearly a full decade before the Black Death was first recorded arriving in Europe. He's not the first to see these records. Generations of scholars have browsed these notes, but he's the first to truly see them, to recognize what they mean. Slavin becomes obsessed. He examines every detail, the dates, the inscriptions, the artifacts buried with the dead. He compares mortality records. He cross-references historical sources. He realizes these aren't random deaths from various causes. This isn't normal seasonal mortality. This is a catastrophe, happening in one place, at one precise moment in time. He's almost certain what he's found. His historian's instinct screams it. The evidence is staring him right in the face. The timeline fits. The location fits. The symptoms fit. But certainty and proof are 2 different things. A conviction is not evidence. A theory is not science. A historian's conviction, however strong, is not scientific proof. He needs something definitive. He needs DNA. He needs to reach back across 7 centuries and pull genetic proof from the very bones of the dead. And for that, he needs the world's leading paleogeneticists. Enter the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. Here's what these scientists already knew. They'd been hunting the plague's origin for years. Systematically, methodically. They'd collected over 1,300 genetic samples from across the globe, from modern plague bacteria in labs, from ancient victims in graves, from infected rodents still carrying the disease today. Everything. They'd spent years building something unprecedented, a massive genetic family tree of the plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis. And in that data, in that intricate map of genetic relationships spanning centuries, they'd found something remarkable, something extraordinary. In the early 14th century, the bacteria underwent what they called a big bang of diversification. From a single ancestral strain, 4 new major lineages suddenly burst into existence. Suddenly, dramatically, 4 new strains where there had been one. One of those lineages became the Black Death. One ancestor, one original strain, fathered the most devastating pandemic in human history. But where was the mother strain? Where was the source? Not in Europe. When they examined plague victims from the Black Death era in Europe and Asia Minor, the bacteria had already mutated. It had already changed. Multiple mutations separated them from the original. The European strain was a descendant, a child, not the original ancestor. The true origin had to be somewhere else, somewhere in Asia, somewhere in that vast continent where trade routes connected everyone and everything. Then Slavin's discovery lands on their desk. A collaboration begins. Kyrgyzstan. 1338. Graves marked with pestilence. Skeletal remains preserved in a museum for over a century. This could be it. They reached out to the Peter the Great Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography in St. Petersburg. They found those skeletal remains from 1886, still there, still preserved, still waiting, as if history itself knew someone would eventually return for them. The team made a crucial decision. They would extract DNA from teeth, because dental pulp holds onto secrets better than bone. The inner chamber of a tooth, protected from the environment for centuries, can preserve traces of blood-borne pathogens. It can hold genetic material from diseases that ravaged a person in their final days. 7 individuals. That's all they had. 7 sets of remains from the cemetery. They extracted DNA from the teeth of all 7. 3 tested positive. The unmistakable genetic signature of plague. Yersinia pestis, present in 3 of those 7 individuals. 3 people who died in 1338 in a cemetery on the shores of Lake Issyk-Kul carried the exact bacteria that would reshape human civilization. They had their smoking gun. But then came the moment that changed everything. They sequenced the full genome of the ancient bacteria. They compared it against their global family tree of plague strains. Every known variant, every documented strain from across the centuries. They ran the analysis. They waited for results. Perfect match. Not just a plague strain, the ancestral strain, the mother of them all. The exact point, the precise node, where the Big Bang began 700 years ago. They'd found ground zero. So how did a localized outbreak in a mountain cemetery become a pandemic that killed 75 million people across multiple continents? The region around Lake Issyk-Kul is a natural plague reservoir. It always has been. Wild rodents, marmots, gerbils, voles carry the bacteria naturally, continuously. The infection lives in their population. It's their ecosystem, their burden. They've evolved alongside it for thousands of years. The bacteria and the rodents, they've learned to coexist. But something changed in the 1330s. Climate shifts, unusually warmer, wetter springs. The vegetation flourished like never before. Plants bloomed, flowers bloomed, the grasslands exploded with growth. And following that growth came the rodents, a population boom. More marmots, more gerbils, more voles than the region had seen in years. More animals meant more fleas carrying the bacteria. More opportunities for transmission. One infected flea. One marmot hunted for its meat or fur. One human bitten in an unlucky moment. That's all it took to jump the species barrier, to move from animal host to human host, to begin the deadliest chapter in human history. But this community wasn't isolated. They were traders. Their graves tell us that. Pearls from the Indian Ocean, coins from Iran, artifacts from across the Mediterranean. They were merchants. They were connected to the Silk Road, that vast network of human connection that crisscrossed Asia, linking east to west. And they were moving westward. Imagine those camel caravans moving across the steppes, laden with goods, pearls and coins and silks, hidden in the cargo or nestled in travelers' belongings. Black rats, stowaway rats aboard merchant ships, and on those rats, Infected fleas carrying Yersinia pestis. The plague traveled in darkness and silence, mile by mile, settlement by settlement. A slow, invisible march of death across Central Asia, through trading posts, through oasis towns, through the interconnected network of the Silk Road. Eventually, the caravans reached the Crimean Peninsula, the port city of Kaffa, 1346. There, history records something chilling. The Mongol army catapulting the corpses of their own plague victims over the city walls, one of the earliest documented acts of biological warfare. The plague boarded ships, Genoese merchant vessels, and those ships sailed to the Mediterranean, then to Venice, then to Genoa, then inland to the densely packed, rat-infested medieval cities of Europe. And in Europe's filthy streets, unsanitary conditions, and exploding rat populations, the plague found paradise. Here's what transformation looks like. A forgotten cemetery in Central Asia becomes the birthplace of the deadliest pandemic in human history. A stone grave, etched with a single word in Syriac, holds the secret that humanity spent 600 years trying to solve. 600 years of questions, 600 years of theories, 600 years of uncertainty. Ancient DNA didn't just answer a historical question. It rewrote our understanding of how pandemics begin. It showed us that disease doesn't respect borders, that it travels on trade routes, that it hides in the fur of animals. It showed us that one person, one flea, one moment of contact can reshape civilization, that the vulnerable places on a map, the mountain villages, the trading settlements, the crossroads of commerce, might be where the next outbreak starts. And it revealed something else, something important. These people in that cemetery, they weren't victims of fate. They weren't destined to become the first casualties. They were ordinary. They were traders living ordinary lives, conducting ordinary business, moving ordinary goods across trade routes, and then, one microscopic bacterium decided their story. Without their knowledge, without their consent, they became the first casualties of something they could never have anticipated. But their bones told us everything, every detail, every secret written in their DNA. If you listen to the right evidence, if you look in the right places, history always speaks. The past is never truly silent. You just have to know how to listen. History Diary uncovers the stories written in our DNA, the moments when science and human history collide to reveal what we thought was lost forever. The mysteries, the discoveries, the transformations that shaped us all. If you want to discover more mysteries that changed the world, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Every week, we bring you the untold stories of history, because the past isn't silent. You just have to know how to listen. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to History Diary for more untold stories from our past.